Y'all, today we're going to be reacting to Reddit stories. And not sus Reddit stories because I'm a minor. Okay, let's get into it. Okay. Reddit stories.
My family had always seemed ordinary. We celebrated birthdays together, spent every Thanksgiving at my grandparents' house in Ohio, and never missed our annual summer trip to a small lake cabin in Michigan. I believed we were the kind of family that had no real secrets. Everything changed at my grandmother's 85th birthday party. Most of the guests had already left when an elderly woman I had never seen before walked up to me. She smiled sadly, looked me straight in the eyes, and quietly said, "You deserve to know who saved you when you were a baby." I laughed awkwardly, assuming she'd mistaken me for someone else. But before leaving, she handed me an old photograph. It showed my parents standing beside another couple, holding me as an infant. When I asked my mother about the picture, her face turned completely pale. That night, both of my parents finally admitted the truth they had hidden for nearly 30 years. When I was only 6 months old, my biological parents were killed by a drunk driver. The couple in the photograph were my real parents. My aunt and uncle adopted me immediately because they didn't want me growing up
Okay.
foster care. They raised me as their own child and never told anyone outside the family. Every birthday, every holiday, every childhood memory suddenly looked different. I wasn't angry. I was overwhelmed by the realization that the people I called mom and dad had chosen me every single day, even though they never had to. The next morning, my mother opened a small wooden box filled with letters, baby photos, and memories from my biological parents. She said they had been waiting for the right time to tell me, but they were always afraid of losing me. Instead, I hugged them tighter than I ever had before. That conversation didn't destroy my family. It revealed how much love had been protecting me all along. What would you do if one sentence completely changed everything you...
Okay. That's wholesome, except,
What did someone say to...
While babysitting my neighbor's kids, the 8-year-old asked, "Why did mommy tell daddy you're the reason they're getting divorced?" I nearly dropped the juice box I was handing to her.
Wait, what?
While babysitting my neighbor's kids, the 8-year-old asked, "Why did mommy tell daddy you're the reason they're getting divorced?" I nearly dropped the juice box I was handing to her little brother. "What do you mean, sweetie?" My voice came out higher than normal as my stomach dropped like a stone. Emma's big brown eyes stared at me with that brutal honesty only kids possess. Mommy was crying on the phone last night. She said you ruined everything and now daddy has to move out. The living room suddenly felt too small, too quiet except for the cartoon still playing on the TV. I knelt down to Emma's level, my hands trembling slightly. "Emma, sometimes adults say things when they're upset that don't make sense." But even as I said it, my mind raced through every interaction I'd had with the Morrison family. David thanking me for watching the kids, Rachel seeming distant lately, barely making eye contact during pickup, the way she'd started paying me through Venmo instead of cash, her messages cold and formal. Something was very wrong here, and I had no idea what I'd supposedly done. Emma tilted her head like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "But mommy showed daddy pictures on her phone. She said you were doing bad things." My blood rushed to my face as I grabbed my phone. Shaking fingers, I started scrolling through my photo gallery, my social media, anything that Rachel might have seen and misinterpreted. Then I found it buried in my Instagram from 2 weeks ago. A photo I'd posted of myself making breakfast at 7 a.m., still in my pajamas, with the caption, "Sunday morning vibes." In the background, barely visible through my kitchen window, was David's car parked in my driveway. But David hadn't been at my house that morning. I'd been alone, making pancakes for myself like I did every weekend. I stared at the photo, zooming in on the silver sedan that looked exactly like his Honda Civic. The license plate was partially obscured, but the first 3 letters were clearly visible. KJH. David's plate started with KJH. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had security cameras facing the road. Within 20 minutes, she'd sent me footage from that Sunday morning at 6:47 a.m., showing David's car pulling into my driveway while I was clearly visible through my kitchen window, alone and cooking. The footage revealed something that made my stomach lurch. David had sat in my driveway for over an hour, just watching my house while I moved around inside completely unaware. Mrs. Chen's cameras captured him taking photos through his car window, angling his phone to make it look like he was inside with me. The timestamps showed he'd been there from 6:47 to 8:23 a.m., documenting my morning routine like surveillance. I realized with growing horror that David had been creating fake evidence of an affair that didn't exist. I immediately called Rachel, my voice shaking as I tried to explain. "Rachel, I need to show you something about the photos David gave you." But she cut me off, screaming that I was a homewrecker who destroyed her family. She hung up before I could tell her about the security footage. 20 minutes later, I heard shouting from next door. Through my window, I watched David storm out with a suitcase while Rachel stood in the doorway yelling. Emma and her brother were pressed against their upstairs window, watching their world fall apart because of lies their father had created. Detective Morrison arrived that evening after Rachel filed a police report claiming David and I were having an affair. I showed her the security footage, a timeline of David's staged photographs, and my phone records proving I'd never communicated with him outside of babysitting arrangements. She studied everything carefully, then asked if I'd noticed any other strange behavior. That's when I remembered the weird comments he'd made about my schedule, how he always seemed to know when I was home alone, the way he'd linger during pickup talking about my social media posts he shouldn't have seen since we weren't connected online. The investigation revealed David's elaborate plan to frame me for an affair as a cover for his own infidelity. Police found evidence on his laptop showing he'd been meeting someone else for months at hotels during times he claimed to be at work.
No.
Hell no, man. What the fuck, man? Get your ass on.
Better get your freak ass on, boy.
Staged photos of my house were part of his strategy to shift blame and make Rachel think he was the victim. His browser history showed searches for how to prove wife's babysitter is having an affair and staging evidence of cheating for divorce court. David had been planning this deception for weeks, using me as an unwitting scapegoat for his own betrayal. Rachel called me crying 2 days later, apologizing for not listening and begging me to testify in their divorce proceedings. The security footage had proven David's deception, and Rachel's attorney needed my statement about his behavior. During the deposition, David's lawyer tried to claim the surveillance was coincidental, but the prosecutor had found 47 photos on his phone taken from my property over 6 different dates, all carefully staged to suggest intimacy that never existed. The judge awarded Rachel full custody and ordered David to pay for the therapy both kids would need after living through his psychological manipulation. 6 months later, Emma still asks me to babysit, but now she talks about how much happier her mom seems without daddy's lying games. Rachel rebuilt her life, got a promotion at work, and started dating someone who treats her with respect.
Oh.
David moved across town and has supervised visits twice a month, still claiming he was protecting his family. But the evidence speaks louder than his lies, and now 3 people know the truth about who really destroyed that marriage. While babysitting my neighbor.
Okay.
I laughed while my ex-husband's new wife threw a tantrum. My ex and I share 3 teens, 16, 15, and 14. We divorced when our youngest was still a baby, and we've followed a strict custody plan ever since, mostly to avoid drama. No, his wife wasn't the reason we split, but he did cheat on me during my high-risk pregnancy. He thought that was okay because I couldn't have... Things got messy, and co-parenting's
Wait,
been
what?
tough ever reason we split. But he did cheat on me during my high-risk pregnancy. He thought that was okay because I couldn't have... I didn't. Things got messy, and co-parenting's been tough ever since.
Just for context, I skipped that Reddit story. Okay, here's the next one.
What is the creepiest and most unexplainable paranormal experience you've ever had? This didn't happen to me, but to my family. My grandfather was a violent alcoholic who terrorized everyone around him for decades. He tried to kill my grandmother in front of their 6 children.
Whoa!
One of his horrible acts was abandoning her with all those kids, every single one under the age of 12, leaving her to raise them alone with nothing. Some of his children maintained minimal contact with him over the years, though most kept their distance. He lived about 30 miles from my grandmother and the 2 kids who'd stayed in the area. The relationship was strained at best. Obligation calls on holidays, maybe a brief visit once or twice a year. Nobody forgot what he'd done to their mother. When he was in his 80s, he was hospitalized with complications from decades of alcohol abuse. His body was finally giving out after years of punishment. He passed away alone in the middle of the night, surrounded by machines instead of family. Nobody had expected it to happen so suddenly. The next morning, his oldest daughter, my aunt, went to the morgue to identify the body and handle the paperwork. Before heading to the hospital, she stopped by my grandmother's house to break the news. She dreaded having to tell her mother, not knowing how she'd react after everything he'd put her through. When my aunt walked in, my grandmother was sitting at her kitchen table doing a jigsaw puzzle, humming softly to herself. Before my aunt could say anything, my grandmother looked up calmly and said, "Oh, it's a sad day. He died just past midnight, I imagine." My aunt froze. She assumed someone had already called, maybe one of her siblings, maybe the hospital.
Wait.
My grandmother had been showing signs of dementia lately, so the odd comment didn't seem too unusual at first. My aunt just nodded, gave her a hug, and headed to the morgue to handle the arrangements. At the morgue, when she saw the death certificate, my aunt's blood ran cold. The official time of death was listed as 12:10 a.m., just past midnight, exactly as my grandmother had said. My aunt had been the first to be notified.
Okay, guys, I think the grandma killed the grandpa, but if she did, low-key W, because that grandpa had some problems.
By the hospital that morning. On her way home, my aunt stopped back at my grandmother's house. She had to know. "Mom," she asked carefully, "who called to tell you he died? And how did you know it was just past midnight?" My grandmother set down her puzzle piece and smiled, not with bitterness or pain, but with something that looked almost like peace. "Nobody called, honey. He came to see me himself at 12:30. We talked for a spell." My aunt felt the hair on her arms stand up. "What do you mean he came to see you?" "He appeared right here in my living room," my grandmother said, pointing to the spot near her recliner. "Clear as day. He wanted to apologize for all he'd done to me and you kids over the years. For the beatings, the drinking, leaving us with nothing, for trying to," she paused, her voice catching slightly, "for that night, with the night." She resumed her humming, fitting another puzzle piece into place. "I think he made his peace and was able to move on, so I'm glad for that. After carrying all that anger and hurt for so long, he finally let it go, and so can I." My aunt sat there stunned, doing the math in her head. He died at 12:10 a.m. My grandmother said he visited at 12:30 a.m., just 20 minutes after his death was officially recorded. She'd known he died before anyone could have possibly told her, down to the approximate time, because his ghost had come to apologize. My grandmother went back to her puzzle, completely at peace with what she'd experienced. She didn't seem scared or unsettled, just relieved. After 50 years of carrying the weight of his abuse, she'd finally received the apology she'd never gotten while he was alive. My aunt never-
Yeah, bro. I thought the grandma killed him. Like, yeah. Okay. Whatever. Okay, guys, this is the last Reddit story I'm gonna do.
Level 9 got stepsister invited me into a room.
What?
My level 9 got stepsister invited me into a room. My stepsister, Lily, and I had been living under the same roof for a few months by then. Our parents had married in a whirlwind romance, and suddenly, we were siblings. Except, it didn't really feel like it. Lily and I were like 2 planets orbiting the same sun, close but never quite intersecting. She was from her dad's previous marriage, and I was from my mom's, and somehow that invisible line of different parents kept us politely distant. Then, one evening, everything changed. I was walking past her room when the door swung open. There she was, standing in the doorway with an uncertain but hopeful smile, wearing Nike Pro shorts and a tube top. "Hey, do you want to come in? I thought maybe we could hang out," she said.
See what you dance, dance, dance. Girl, open up on you, so just dance, dance, dance.
Sister
If you
invited me
enjoyed this video,
into a room.
make sure to leave a thumbs up and give me some more video ideas because this was obviously like a last resort and I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. So, make sure to subscribe and yeah, just lock in. Bye!